Good morning. This is Dr. James Weldon, Yogadhi, speaking to you from our community on Heavenly Mountain in the United States in Boone, a community that is dedicated to service. Heavenly Mountain here is dedicated to doing good. And I've been fortunate enough to have been guided in my life by some unbelievably great individuals. And I live in my home, on the mountain here, a Boone, 1,000 acres. It's a huge, huge facility, the entire community. Unbelievably big. It's over 1 million square feet of structures already built. Families, homes, and it's dedicated to personal growth and to bridging the gaps in our understanding. I'll be introducing today book 2 of my personal autobiography. This is the 26th or more of episodes that we've done online, offered freely. Well, Heavenly Mountain is located in Boone, North Carolina. Blue Ridge Mountains. This actually area is the oldest mountain range in the world. It's a continental divide, even older than the Himalayas. Very, very old. But being so old, it settled down. The altitude is not so high. At one point, where I'm living right now was at the top of mountains, like the Himalayas. Very, very old. And a very, very special place. Blue Ridge Mountains are really beautiful. And I'm sharing my personal story, my personal adventure story, spiritual adventure story in this work. You know, I'm going to be talking about things which are not commonly discussed. Frankly and honestly discussing what I passed through in my life. But before we do that, let me begin with a little prayer, a well-wishing for everyone, and I'll describe it. So close your eyes. Take a moment, take a long, deep breath. Feel the presence. Satyam param dhimahi. Satyam param dhimahi. Satyam param dhimahi. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And in your own time, when you feel ready, you can slowly open your eyes. This is a wish. And it basically can be translated as, may the truth, Satyam, may the great understanding take up residence in your consciousness. May it be known, may it be lived. And as a result of that, in the mind, in the body, in the spirit, 3 times, may there also be peace in the 3 major phases of life. The inner dimension, the body, and in the world as a whole. This is very old. This particular chant, by the way, is many thousands of years old. And it was actually sung by the first rishi that was in North America. There was one. I won't go into that. Some 2,500 years ago, actually. We have stories in our culture like Journey to the Center of the Earth. And there's been an effect upon those times, the Mayan civilizations and the spirituality that went into Native American traditions that came down. I won't distract you by discussing that, but I can tell you there's a lot that we don't know. You know, I in the ending of the last episode, I said, this is an adventure story. This is a very personal adventure story of what I passed through, but we're all equally on that adventure story. And imagine if you had total amnesia and you woke up one morning, wouldn't you want to know about the past? What brought you to this? Do you think that would provide some clarity in terms of what you're going on? I know it seems like that's an analogy, but that is actually the truth of every single person's life. And in my case, I forgot. But when I was a child, actually before some of my earliest memories, I started to memorize and remember some of this. And in the last book, Living the Enlightened Life, the actual title was The Secret Journey to the Enlightened Mind. The remembrance of that was what I had passed through in the earlier, at this point, let me see, 38 years. And my teaching in the area of spirituality, yoga, meditation, and trying to uncover that had been several decades, actually much earlier. And you're not going to be able to understand what's coming from this point really without watching and listening to the previous works. So approximately 25 hours worth of talking. No, 15 hours, about half of that. Okay, 12 and a half hours or so going through book 1. But honestly, for those that will be picking up this second book, you really need to read that as well, because that'll provide a perspective to begin to understand what I'm passing through here. But this work is describing the rising, in my personal experience, of tremendously great teacher in the world who I consider to be really the first global world teacher. And we've had certainly great wisdom in the world, but not of this level. And I need to summarize that past book for those of you who are coming. So trying to consolidate, the ocean in a few drops. Can't be done. But at least to give a little bit of a perspective. So, my journey up to this point, there were two major things that had to happen. I needed to find and verify a path, a way to living wisdom and knowledge. And then, number two, find the highest source of that knowledge. If I was fortunate enough to do that, and to be with those teachers, to study and listen to their words, because knowledge and wisdom in books stays there. In the pathway to living our deepest and most profound joy and our expanded states of consciousness is a very, very subtle one. And needs proper education. No child learns to read or write or even speak without mother being there. Without proper education. And what I passed through up to this point was that. So, one of the great mysteries in our life is birth, right? All of a sudden we come here. Where did we come from? What happened before? What's the backstory? There's always a backstory. So we all have amnesia, and we're born with that amnesia for a very specific reason. We're born with amnesia because just like when we have a difficult day at work, we sleep, and, in our life, if we have a difficult time, time cures, heals us. And we have enough to deal with that if we were really carrying the true dimension of our life, this is our life, this is your life, it would be overwhelming, totally overwhelming. But what we do remember is the feelings. We don't remember the specific events. Maybe a little bit. When I discovered that really children, they do know the truth, they're born with that. In those first early years of their life, the oneness is imminent. This unity state, these advanced states, most children, they have that, but for a few years. And in my case, as a child, I started getting clues in this mystery story of my life in a space between waking, dreaming, and sleeping. Occasionally I would have clues. Not all children do this. I wonder, even if they did, they wouldn't know. But I would see, even when I was very, very young, 4 or 5, sometimes some events before they happened. And then what was most difficult for me is that I had flashbacks. I didn't know that, but I would wake up in terror, sweating deep in the night. And I would see stomping feet and everything. So I didn't learn until much later that this actually had to do with my past. I was traumatized. I had PTSD as a child. And this had to do with that life actually in Tibet, in the northeastern part of India. And the second thing that happened in my childhood is that sometimes I found myself in an alternative space, not in the body. Very innocently as a child, I would imagine the beach. I grew up in Cocoa Beach, Florida. My father was one of the founders in the space industry. And I lived on the beach in Cocoa Beach. and I loved to ride my bicycle down even when I was very young. But sometimes I couldn't go, and I would imagine myself maybe going, and it turned out that I could do that. I didn't know that that wasn't possible. And sometimes some of the things that I experienced there, they were really there. I would go down later. And these things were both frightening and inspiring. But I turned away from them. And at a very young age, I looked for answers. And I did look in my native traditions of religion and Christianity. And I totally gave myself to that. We had our own church when I was 13 years old. And we prayed and we cried and we worshiped. And I had something very powerful that happened. And I was ready to just quit and go help share that. And I found myself with the death of my father, with the divorce, with the alcoholism in the family, lost actually at that time in suffering. I was very, very empathetic. I felt the suffering and the unhappiness of other people very deeply. And I saw death, and I felt it, experienced it very deeply. And I rebelled against that. I didn't want part of it. And by the time I got to my college, I was a mess. All of this that I'd passed through, and I almost lost it. Back in the Vietnam time, fortunately, I got a free ride in college, but we rebelled and we took a dive into drugs and alcohol and rebelling and revolting. And without going into it, I could have easily ended up, damaging my mind. And actually, I could have ended up in prison as well. But something happened. And what happened is I came into contact with some of the first spiritual teachers. And I learned meditation when I was 21 and had very deep and profound experiences. And I began to discover my inner subtle body, all of this stuff, the chakras and the inner centers. I was passing through that. And I was fortunate enough to meet my first great spiritual teacher. His name was called the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And he taught the Beatles to meditate. I loved the music. And I became a teacher for him, founded a community and retreat center, ashram, in Florida, which operated for many years. Many tens of thousands of people learned there. And came into contact with some really wonderful people, always trying to deepen my experience. And very powerful energy started coming in my body. These subtle pathways called nadis begin to open up. The life force began to open up, and I found myself going through some pretty deep and powerful experiences with this life force called the Kundalini, spontaneous yoga, insights, prana, knowledge of breathing happening automatically. And then opening up to the well of bliss. And when I traveled to meet that first teacher, the Maharishi, I didn't know actually two others at that time. One was ultimately to be my second teacher. Maharishi said, okay, go be with him. And he was a different type of teacher in the devotional side, sound. His name was Swami Muktananda Siddha Yoga, very great group. And he passed away, but I continued to study with his successor. And also while I was there, I met another great spiritual being, but not in what you would call a normal plane of life. You know, there are different levels of creation. You know that there's the physical, there's electronic, the subatomic, the energetic, but the body has actually 7 levels of existence, and there's actually other levels of life which we don't know. Some experience that to some degree, but for mostly those subtler realms are protected. It's not easily that someone passes into those. But in this whole process of meeting these, I was transported to a level of life which I was told actually was the finest level of life, finest level of this creation, and given a spiritual gift of wisdom and the ability to see wisdom, called pragya. And not knowing what happened there, seeking a deeper, direct guide, somehow that third being became really the teacher on the inner levels of life. And I didn't want to, completely accept that. I watched it very carefully. But what happened is the intensity of joy became unbelievable. Some of the characteristics of this first state of what's called cosmic awareness, cosmic consciousness, begin to happen. That's a state where consciousness is never lost. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it continues. The mind can come and go. There's a part of our being which is completely above and beyond that. I don't want to go into it in much detail. It's talked about. But tremendous happiness began to open up, a level of happiness which is beyond the normal experiences, really bliss. There is a state, there is that. And I began to understand and feel my connection with others in a very profound way. And I began to understand what is that highest attainment. Now, people really cannot talk about that because that is not a field of 2 or more. That's a field of oneness. You can point towards it, and the book that I wrote is intended to just point towards that. But, you need to understand that in the realm of the deeper aspect of development of consciousness and the fulfillment of this journey that we're all on, whether we know it or not, that can be experienced and lived. It's not like something out here, some object. It's known by itself. But it's kind of only those beings that have attained that are on the highest mountain can see where we may be in our development. It's a very tricky, it's like living on a razor. And there are many places at which we can fall this way or that way, get lost in this capability, that capability. I mean, the whole world is lost in what? Even though they've only been here a few years, they think this is what they are. They think that the life that they're living is all that there is. And they're totally, chasing whatever. Money and sex and, attainment and creating this. And all of that is great. Have that. But if you think that that is ultimate fulfillment, it never will satisfy. Because the senses that we have, hearing, touch, taste, smell, are limited. And we are looking for a joy and a level of life and purity and clarity which doesn't change, which continues. So at the end of that book, I call out to these great teachers of the world. You know, the world certainly needs it. Wouldn't you agree? You know, the real changes that are taking place in the world are not taking place through words, even through actions. There's a much deeper phenomenon happening. This world is one living being. And that doesn't need to be a philosophy. It can be an experience. Even this universe is one being. And in the same way, you are in charge of these trillions of cells in the body, and all these individual cells have their own life, right? The mustache cell is growing there and creating a little bit longer mustache. Okay? In the skin and the eyes, they have their own, they're eating, they're drinking, they're sleeping, they have their own job to do. They have their own consciousness. In a certain sense, you're the divine force overlooking in control of all of these trillions of lives. And millions of cells are coming and going all the time. In the same exact way, we are part and parcel of the greater life, and we have not experienced and known our connection with the greater life. That's what's emerging in the world now. That's what's emerging in the world. So this connectedness, you see, the trillions of cells in the body can't imagine the conversation we're having right now. Believe me, it's beyond that. But still, since the mind is connected to the body, the hands that don't understand are doing the bidding of you. And in the same way, there's a natural evolutionary process where we're coming into connection with the big life. This is now easy to understand because of the internet, perhaps. Now, I can type anything onto the board, XYZ, whatever, and something will come up. I can type any country in the world, any place. You know, we're connected to all the knowledge, basically, in all the books. Isn't that amazing? The field of consciousness is actually like that. And this is verified by physics and quantum mechanics. There's senses in that. But we need to become linked to that so that we do what we need to do. So we can bring in and play our role. You don't lose your individuality in the sense that, you know, Dr. James Weldon, Yogadhi, whoever he is, continues, but we're driven by this greater force. Okay. In the world as a whole, you're not going to change the opinions of all the people that have different views. Political opinions, philosophical opinions, the whole philosophy, whatever idea, whatever religion, whatever, you're not going to bring everybody together on that level. There's a deeper process. And the whole world is actually beginning to wake up. We are in an age of awakening consciousness. And these states, which were so, so rare, in the last chapter, I did my own estimates. Who knows if it's correct? Chances were like 1 in 5 million that a person would come into contact that and take it. But because of the global transportation and airplanes and the internet now, we're entering a time where, maybe one, I believe, by the time this journey, my individual life is over and finished. It's not finished, it continues, but maybe 1 in 250. It's a huge awakening. And that is happening, and most people don't know. But it is happening. So let's begin. chapter 1 of this next book. And actually, by the way, a lot of these chapters are in this original work of mine, but this is going to have to be a separate book because there's a whole bunch that I didn't talk about in here. It needs to be, you know, it's real. This is really important. And what I'm doing here has never, as far as I know, never been done. Really laying out, honestly, directly, warts and all that I've passed through as an inspiration that this is a poem. And by the way, as you read some of these, don't compare. Okay, you know, maybe my life is an illustration of the possibilities of consciousness. And so I went through so many things, and there's so many more things yet here to be described. And as usual, these different chapters, I've been writing poems. I'm a poet, if I didn't know it. Now I know it. But I've been collecting these poems over the years, these stories of inspiration, at least, that jumped out of me. And the poem of this first chapter of the book, The Rise of the First World Teacher, whatever you want to call that. Really a global phenomenon. And the prayer is entitled, All My Prayers Are the Same. So, reading from this. Sometimes I feel the prayers of many living beings, like a chorus, all about me as one great song saying, where are you, my beloved? I'm lost and unhappy, and I can't find my way back home. Behind these prayers, I hear another song calling back. Don't you hear me? Don't you see me? I'm right here, my dear. Right beside you and all around you and within you forever. Dry your tears. Don't cry. My dear, just wake up. For it's all just a play. It's all just a fun. Come see that I'm closer than your own breath. What we are seeking is closer than our own breath, closer than our own mind, closer than our own intellect, closer than our ego, closer than everything that we imagine that we are, which is not true. And deep within, that story is unfolding. So, this is the foreword of book 2. You know, of the next work, my autobiography of Yogadhi. It's my story. But honestly, nobody has done anything like this because there is such great beings in this world now. And in my view, the greatest of them all is coming, is here. And the title of that is The Rise of the First World Teacher. So tomorrow we'll begin that discussion and sharing. Thank you for taking the time to listen. You know, honestly, this work is being sent out with no fanfare. You know, and actually, I love it this way because I'm looking for nothing. Zero. Right now, it isn't like there are millions of people listening to this. And I prefer that. Quietly, simply, behind the scenes. Nobody knows. Few listen. But I'm telling you already, that's one of the reasons that I'm sharing this really for the first time now. Is because I have huge numbers of friends over the globe. Hundreds of thousands, millions really. Are now been caught up in this. And what I'm going to say or share is going to have no effect on that. It's already a process, already underway. And in the West, not recognized, at this point, although it's already here, someplace. And I live right in the middle of that on a beautiful place called Heavenly Mountain in Boone, North Carolina, Blue Ridge Mountains here. And the whole story of how that was created and my journey for that and how I struggled so many years to be a part of allow this to happen is what I'm going to share, and the difficulties and the trials and the failures and the mistakes and the being led astray, and that's the story yet to come. So join me tomorrow for a couple of those episodes. And everything here now is on Facebook. Under my personal page, or all the chapters leading up to this. There's a free ebook that you can get on this story, which contains not everything I'm going to share in this book, but a portion of it, because an entire decade has passed since this story, The Secret Journey to the Enlightened Mind, was actually first put out and then just kind of held back. Few people got it, few people read it, and I'm happy about that, because the time wasn't right. The time now is right. So enjoy your day. It's an Easter weekend. It's appropriate. It's full moon here, and at least where I'm at. And do some good. Give to people. Care for them. Love them. Because they are part and parcel of your own being. In the same way that your family, relatives, friends, something happens to them, it's like it happens to you. I'm telling you, we are absolutely connected with all that is. And that's the discovery that we're all involved in. Thank you, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Bye-bye. Namaste.